News today comes from The Athletic. Diana Rossini, who was at the owners' meetings. I saw her. She was working everyone, talking to people. She's plugged in. And she was on her podcast today, and she said that, if Brock Purdy truly were a top 10 quarterback, independent of the 49ers situation, their team, their coach, how come no teams have called the 49ers to try to trade for him? And her co-host, Chase Daniel, was like, what? She was like, yeah, no teams have called for him. So, Connor, how do you interpret that? Do you think that means that they just feel like, what's the point of even calling because Brock's so incredible and the Niners would never trade him? Or does it mean that maybe other teams are like, well, he wouldn't be as good on our team?
I think it's one of those things if they're like, that's the next Tom Brady. They're like, we're not going to be able to wait. It's not April 1st. Oh shit, I can't make that joke. That's on me. No, I think it's one of two options, right? The first option is no team thinks that the Niners would ever trade him, which I think is a fair thought. I don't really see them trading him right now, and it seems like they're pretty high on him still. The second option is the one that is kind of a little more up in the air, I feel like, is that no team wants him at all. They're just like, nope, we're happy with what we've got, and we don't need Brock, which I feel like that's a little less likely, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case either. Like a lot of these teams nowadays, they have a lot of younger quarterbacks, and Brock's young, don't get me wrong, but a lot of teams nowadays, I think you can be confident in the draft a little bit more and not really be stressed about like, oh, well, maybe we need to send the whole farm to the Niners just to get Brock. Maybe teams aren't really worried about that now. I'm curious, though, to hear your opinions on this because I know that you might have a little more of an in on this, I feel like.
Well, I don't. It just seems like what Jed said at the owners' meetings, like he's the top 10 with Kyle, which is debatable because he had Kyle last year and wasn't top 10. But he's top 10 like in a specific situation that the Niners can provide. Okay, but does any team think that he'd be top 10 in a different situation? And if he's only top 10 in one situation, like what does that mean that he really is? Does it mean that he's not worth all the money that he's asking for? It seems like this is an interesting test. A lot of times in these situations, an elite player wants an extension or expresses displeasure with his current deal, and teams start calling. Like we saw with Stafford last month. The Rams weren't sure whether they were going to give Stafford what he wanted because he's older, and the Raiders called. Like, okay, we want him. We'll pay him. We're not even going anywhere, and we'll pay him. So same thing happened with Ayuk last year. It seemed like if there was a team that thought the Niners were messing up, like you're having second thoughts about giving Brock Purdy $60 million a year, that's ridiculous. We would love to give Brock Purdy Let's call John Lynch right now and take Brock Purdy off his hands because he doesn't know what to do with Brock. That's not happening. And I think that's instructive for the 49ers. Maybe it emboldens them to not give up and capitulate.
Yeah, I see your point. I think you do bring up like a really good point with that. And it's so weird nowadays too, because I mean, in particular too, I like the Stafford comparison in particular. Like that one's really, really a good comparison. And I also do think at the same time, though, I think Stafford is a lot better than Purdy. So it shouldn't really be a shock that Stafford's getting those
He's
offers.
a top 10 quarterback on any team.
Exactly. No matter where he is, he's got an arm that like no one can ever like replicate. He's got a very precise arm. He's quick with the ball. Like I don't think there's anyone close to that. But the thing that's weird to me too is you would think if an older guy like Matt Stafford, who's going to be a top 10 quarterback on any team, if people are willing to trade for him, why would they not be willing to go for a younger Brock Purdy who's still on a small deal? To me, that's why I kind of lean towards the side of every team is aware that the Niners aren't going to get rid of him. Because I feel like if you're really thinking about it, it's like out of the quarterback options, why wouldn't you go for Brock? Like why wouldn't you try the call?
Well, let's play it out. Let's pick a team. Let's say Tennessee. They need a quarterback. They have what, Will Levis?
Yeah,
they're Will Levis and the number one pick. And some people say they should take Cam Ward. Maybe they feel like, well, we like Cam Ward, but Abdul Carter is clearly the number one player on our board, and we'd like to take him. So instead of drafting Cam Ward, let's draft Carter and trade for Purdy. And that way, we get our quarterback and our franchise edge rusher. If they looked at him that way, if they looked at Purdy that way, but I mean, if they brought Purdy to Tennessee, gave him $55 million a year, would he do well? I don't even know who he'd be throwing to. It seems like he'd be setting him up to fail. I mean, if he struggled this year with Jawan Jennings and George Kittle, And Deebo Samuel, what's he going to do in Tennessee? Why would that? I mean, you'd probably be better off just getting players to build around Will Levis.
Yeah, honestly, probably. Like, I just
Yeah.
don't think that there's as much of a like upside for trading for Brock in that scenario. Another thing you've got me thinking too is another option that just came to my head. Since the Raiders just traded for Geno Smith, I believe it was a third round pick, right? They traded him for a third.
Something like that.
What
Yeah.
I feel like the Niners, if a team was going to try and trade for them, they would be like, well, I need like 2 firsts. I feel like that their asking price would be way too high. And that could be another reason because the Niners, I don't think they would let Purdy go for a third. And if I think Geno's a little better than Purdy, then they should theoretically be giving less. But I don't think the Niners would ever give less than that for him. Like, I think they would need a lot.
It's true. I want to talk about Geno in a minute, but I think like Purdy's better than Geno. He's younger than Geno. Neither one's a tier 1 quarterback. So you're talking about like secondary level quarterbacks, or maybe third level quarterbacks, and how much you want to pay him. But I think that's another reason why the Niners haven't gotten any calls for Brock. Like, would the Niners ask for a first round pick? Because no one's going to give a first round pick for Brock. If Geno's worth a third, then Brock's worth a second, and maybe like a pick in the future that's conditional that could become a first round pick if Brock's incredible on his next team. But essentially, he's worth a second round pick, it seems like.
Well, I mean, I think that's where I think maybe you and me disagree slightly because I did hear you say something. I do think, honestly, I might be crazy for this. With the way Geno played last year, I think it's kind of hard to call Brock better than Geno. I think Geno had a pretty good season last year. Brock's younger. He's way younger, so he has way more potential to be better than him. But I think that's exactly what I'm seeing is that I think Geno's here, Brock's here, and the Niners think Brock's here and Geno's here, which
Let's
that's
talk
where
about
the
that.
fundamental issue is.